All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. I can hardly believe that this is our 8th installment of Coffee Chat with Catalyst Creative. So a little bit of background on us before we get started. I am Robert Fowler. I'm the co-founder and CCO of Catalyst Creative. We're a community design agency that focuses on experiences using our proprietary method called the 7th Level Engagement Framework. Catalyst started, I've been saying almost a little over 7 years ago, but I'm realizing we're closer to 8 now. And we've been a fully remote team since day one. So if you've joined some of these coffee chat calls in the past, you've heard about engagement, about remote work. We've talked last week about like business development during these times. So we've really just kind of had these calls to kind of bring together our community, just give you a little midweek break to just kind of dial in and listen. It's just a casual conversation among friends, as I like to say. But if you haven't checked us out on our website, we've created a new landing page at catalystcreative.com, no E at the end of creative, where we have all of the past chats housed. So if you missed any of the previous ones, they'll be there. And today's recording will also be there. Just wanted to let you know that this call is being recorded and that we will be posting that recording here in the next 24 hours in case you want to share that with anyone. Also, if you're joining us by phone, you can send us an email to coffee@catalystcreative, no E at the end of creative.com, and we'll answer any questions with our panelists later on in the call. And then also, if you're joining us via Zoom, which many of you are, at the bottom of the screen, there is a Q&A section. So at the end, you'll be able to ask Barbara and Michelle questions if you just want to put those in there. So thank you guys again for all being with us today. A couple other housekeeping items is if you're having any issues with your audio or anything, you can also dial in if you're having any issues with the Zoom. So now that we've got that out of the way, we just invite you to sit back, take a couple deep breaths, settle in. This is a conversation. A lot of people always ask if you're joining us, you are muted, so you don't have to worry about that. If you're fixing your lunch or have kids in the background, we can't hear you, but you can hear us. So we really wanted to have a coffee chat to discuss foundations and nonprofits for a number of reasons, but I think before we really get into it, we really need to look at what the difference is between a nonprofit and a foundation. You, like me, may have used these words interchangeably, and they are similar, but there are some differences. So a foundation is a nonprofit charitable entity, which is generally created by a single benefactor, usually an individual or business, and foundations usually invest their principal funding, and then they distribute the income from those investments for charitable purposes. Oftentimes, charitable foundations exist to fund charitable activities such as the pursuits of science or education, community, culture, religion, but they're required by law to disperse at least 5% of their assets. And there's no legal limit to how much they can spend, but in practice, they try to retain most of their holdings to ensure that they can continue to exist in the long term. Now, a public charity uses publicly collected funds to direct support to its initiatives. The only real difference between the two is the manner in which the funds are acquired. Public charities or organizations people usually think of when they hear the word charity. So hopefully now we're clear on the difference. And Michelle's probably going to talk a little bit more about the foundation side of things. So starting at the basics, there's a strong relationship between how much money Americans give to charity and their after-tax income. There's a similar correlation between giving and the stock market's performance. This means that people tend to give more money when they feel that they have more money to spare. The reason we wanted to talk about this in COVID is because unemployment is continuing to rise. The stock market has been a little bit volatile. So we wanted to, really start having a conversation around how, COVID may impact nonprofits and charities. So we do also see that some people see charity as a religious or a moral obligation that they must try to uphold regardless of their personal economic circumstances. But for some, giving is a luxury rather than a necessity. Giving is a luxury rather than a necessity, that can go on hold when times get tough. So at the same time, there's some evidence that people may try to help others deal with the hardships that recessions bring about. So in 2008 and 2009, giving fell by a total of 15%, but nonprofits, that were giving, such as food banks and homeless shelters that provided essential social services, grew actually by 10%. So we have two experts on our call with us today so that we can dive into this a little bit more. First, our first panelist is Barbara Merz. Barbara has become a dear friend of mine. She's a mentor, someone I admire so much and respect in so many ways. We met just over 5 years ago when she hired us to help produce the Nature Conservancy's annual Volunteer Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. Barbara led the Nature Conservancy's $7 billion, yes, billion with a B, $7 billion multi-year campaign as their global campaign director, a role which she recently completed. She now serves as a strategy consultant and advisor for philanthropic and social impact organizations. Barbara is one of the smartest people I know. She has her BA from Princeton and her law degree from Stanford. And prior to her role at TNC, she worked with McKinsey, Harvard University, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. I hope I got that right, Barbara. Barbara is joining us today from the San Francisco Bay Area. Our next guest is Michelle Prater. She is the president and CEO of the North Georgia Community Foundation in my hometown of Gainesville, Georgia, and she's been there for the past almost 5 years. Under her guidance, the foundation has grown from $42 million in assets to almost $80 million in assets. She has a super impressive career in nonprofit and foundation work, mostly with the United Way, and has done great things for the community in which I was raised. Michelle is a graduate from North Georgia College and State University, and she has her MBA from Burnell University. A little side note, our own Amanda Slavin served on the Board of Trustees at Burnell in the past and was also the commencement speaker in 2015 for their undergraduate graduating class. So I'd love to just jump in with a few questions. They're both personally and professionally for Barbara and Michelle about how themselves and their organizations have been affected by COVID-19, as well as sort of the role of foundations and nonprofits during a time of crisis. So my first question is for Michelle, because Barbara, I know you've worked remote for quite some time. So Michelle, I'll ask you, how's it been leading a remote team during COVID-19?
Well, it's been interesting. I will say that. I have a team, there's 8 of us total. And as you can imagine, in a community foundation environment, because of the work we do, we've always been in an office. And so when we saw this situation starting to expand, we immediately, as a staff, got together and really created a plan to shift our work to a remote environment. And how could we be effective? How could we make sure that outside, externally, that folks, when they're talking with us or when we're doing things for them, would not be able to feel a difference. So I think the first couple of weeks were pretty much an adjustment, as our team is all used to being under one roof, but we've really made a lot of strides to stay connected. We do check-in calls in the morning and the afternoons. We do a lot of engagement with each other through video chat so that it's more than just a phone call. And we've really been able to set up our work to be very effective and efficient, to where honestly outside of our walls, no one has any idea that there's anything different. If you call our office, you'll receive the same friendly person answering the phone. If you're a new fund member or a new fund holder or a prospect or someone we're talking to, we're treating you the same way. We're doing the same work that we would do regardless of whether we're sitting in an office or sitting in our living room. And I will say I'm very proud of the work that my team has done. We've been able to mobilize a great deal of funding and do a great deal of work while sitting in 8 different locations. And again, as that is so different from the normal standard business status quo for us, it is something that I do take great pride in.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's crazy to see how everyone's had to adjust quickly during these times, and that's awesome. And I know that the community really relies on you guys for a lot of support. So I'm so happy to hear that. You know, I'm curious, Barbara, the people that you're talking to and your clients, and Michelle, for you too, how donations have been affected during this time, and what do you think this says about the state of our economy? Barbara, if you want to go first.
Thanks, Robert. Such a pleasure to be on this. I'm a huge fan of Catalyst Creative, and the fact that you all do this is it's just emblematic of who you are, that you create community even in these times. And Michelle, what a pleasure to have someone at the helm like you, really in this time where community means it's a lifeline for folks. It's an honor to be here. So Robert, with your question, yeah, I mean, this is huge, this moment. I think it's hard to overestimate just the number of underlying structural questions which this pandemic has raised. And in terms of where the market is, your comments at the beginning are very true. This is a moment of shock. No one can really see into the future. It is unclear at this moment what an end game looks like. And I believe that in this time we're seeing nonprofits and foundations make a number of moves. And I recommend, I've been following the Chronicle of Philanthropy very closely, but no one has the crystal ball yet. However, we're seeing a couple trends. Clearly, money has, when people don't know what their income is going to look like, and especially a lot of folks are looking after their primary interests of their own business, their employees, it's hard to consider what the philanthropic giving will look like this year. But at the nonprofit and foundation level itself, three things. One, noticing that a lot of organizations are really taking this moment to reconsider some strategy. Just think about what is it that we have been doing that maybe we don't need to be doing, or where do we need to double down? What's being revealed? The second trend, which is very interesting around giving, is giving cash to the neediest actually becomes really newly popular. We've seen this from literature in human development for a long time, that actually giving cash direct, especially in a time when the future might not be that clear, might be the best efficient use. And third, and I think this is where I'm most interested, it's really about how can we, especially in a nonprofit, cultivate and continue to deepen authentic relationships. And I just want to give a little plug, because I took out my 7th level book this morning, Amanda Slavin. I love this book because, of course, it has such wisdom for these times. This beautiful passage, it just says, in order to deepen our engagement with others, we have to begin with ourselves. We're at a point in time where connection is the most significant factor in changing our trajectories. And I think that's really the opportunity of this moment.
Yeah. I love so much of that. Obviously, we talk so much about engagement at Catalyst. And, I think that obviously, having a book all about it as well. And some of these points are great. I'm curious, Michelle, for you guys, and maybe Michelle, you could tell us a little bit about what a community foundation is and how it differs from, someone just like sitting, watching a ticker to see how donations are coming in. If you could just let us know a little bit more about that. And then, same question for you. How have donations been affected during this time, and what do you think it says about the state of our economy?
Absolutely. And Barbara, thank you. It is wonderful to be meeting you virtually. And I do also want to say that the 7th level book is an amazing tool for us to use. I was fortunate enough to have had that shared with me. So thank you for that, Robert. When you talk about a community foundation, most folks have heard of it, but they don't really understand what a community foundation does. And so briefly, I'm just going to share that, which will help to answer the question about giving during this time. A community foundation operates very similarly to how a bank operates, where folks can open accounts with us. The biggest difference is everything we do is charitable. So when someone has charitable dollars that they would like to utilize either as a scholarship or in a donor advised fund or another manner that they want to create more of a long-term giving solution, they open an account with us. And so when we talk about the things we have or we do, when we say $80 million in assets, that means we have $80 million of funds that we are managing, most of the decision making being done by those individual donors. So it is very different from a typical nonprofit who may have a goal of raising $2 million and they've raised that, and that's how they operate, that's how they function. For a community foundation, we typically operate off of fee income off of those funds that we have. So it is a very different dynamic. And we also are very careful not to do the typical fundraising that you hear nonprofits do, because we don't want to compete with those very folks that we are trying to support. So when we talk about donations from a community foundation perspective, we're talking about money that is coming in to the community foundation, being deposited into individual funds that folks have created. So for example, I have a fund here called the Michelle Prater Giving Fund. It's where I make all of my charitable donations out of. And so when the money comes into that, it's deposited into my fund. And then I make the decisions on how it's utilized with, of course, the oversight of the experts at the community foundation who make sure that I'm using it in a way that is in my best interest. So when we talk about that and we look at how donations have been impacted, from our perspective, we've actually seen a great increase in giving. Folks putting more money into their funds here, and then, giving that money out in resources to help the folks in need. So for us, I think if I had to define the word that is what is allowing us to get through this process and allowing us to get all of us together as a community working through this, my true word is community, because the collaborations and the partnerships and the folks who want to step up and be part of the solution, I can't even put into words how impactful that has been in our journey on this. Specifically for the COVID-19, we opened up a fund that was a relief fund, and it was a community fund where folks could make donations into it, and people could give to that fund so that they could be part of the solution as they're staying home and in the situation where everybody had to have social distancing. This was a way that they could be part of the solution. And our board of directors, which Robert did not say, but I will say, is led actually by his father, who is our board chair and has been such a great leader through this time. They very quickly made the decision that our community foundation would utilize all of our available grant dollars to be part of this relief and recovery effort of this pandemic. So we normally have a community impact cycle every year where nonprofits can apply. This year we decided to mobilize all of our unrestricted resources toward helping our nonprofit partners. So we're using that along with this this relief fund that we created to make that impact. So fortunately, I'm thrilled to say, in a time of great challenge and uncertainty and fear, we're seeing the very best of people giving at levels that are an increase from what we see in what our normal life used to be.
I love that. Yeah, Fidelity Charitable conducted a survey of philanthropic individuals to see how they're thinking about giving in response to the pandemic and how the situation could affect their giving and their volunteering behaviors. And the study underscored that 25% of people plan to increase their donations, and over 50% said that they plan to maintain. So that seems right in line with what you guys have seen there. Barbara, in your experience, and I'm curious, this doesn't just have to pertain to COVID, but how do you keep donors motivated? Not only motivated, but how do you keep them connected? And, in a time like this, how do you keep people informed? Kind of, Michelle was talking about how at the community foundation, how they set up, certain ways for people to donate. But I'm curious, motivation, I think, is a huge thing. And how do you sort of communicate that to people?
Great question. And Michelle, hats off. I'm listening to you and really hearing about how responsive your leadership at a community foundation is. In particular, this is a time where people are awakening more and more to a sense of place. And so being able to develop that relief fund and really motivate their giving through that channel is vital. And I'm so glad for that. I also want to just, in your question, Robert, the nonprofit sector is as big and complex as the world. The giving and the ideas, what people are interested in. And some of those things don't relate at all to this current, health crisis. People have a lot of different kinds of ideas. So in terms of motivation, this is a time where people are by necessity at home. And in order to, I believe, what I've seen effective, it's a small thing, but I'll just share a story. It's actually going back to old-fashioned kind of thoughtful communication, very personal. It's about letters, letter writing. I have had some wonderful engagement with folks who we've finally taken time to, like you can sit outside with a cup of tea late in the afternoon and reflect on some questions that maybe you haven't had the opportunity to really do in the fast pace of the normal nonprofit and foundation world. And having run a very large global campaign, it's such a treasure to remember that at the heart of this, kindness and connection is just core. So having meaningful conversations. Also, I've really experienced great connections and motivation in this time with slowing down and going a bit deeper. There are a couple books that I'm recommending to people, and thank heavens for Amazon. It's really easy to pop a request in to send a book to someone who you can then talk about it later. Those kinds of ideas that require a little bit more mulling. So in my feeling, the meaningful kinds of conversations are very personal. I'm grateful for the mentors, and also people are just having to get out of their masks that we so often wear in board meetings or campaign. We've had some terrific moments, and really just get under to this place of like, what is your personal motivation? How can I really listen deeply to that? And for me, that makes all the difference, because strengthening these relationships now in these times allow us to continue to pivot as a new crisis comes or something else comes around the bend. So I think I'm taking a note from more old-fashioned traditions, letter writing and sharing books. And for me, those relationships I value them so deeply, and I've really found great responses.
I love that. So, I have a few other questions here, and I do want to encourage anyone who's on the calls, if you've got questions, to put those into the Q&A, and we'll make sure to get those as well. But one of the things that Michelle mentioned, my dad is the board chair for North Georgia Community Foundation, and I feel super lucky. My family has sort of instilled in me and my brother the importance of giving back and the importance of, doing things for others, and I feel so lucky for that. And Michelle, glad to hear that he's doing a good job. One of the questions that I have is actually just about that, is about board members and board chairs. And I'm curious, how important is a strong board to the success of a nonprofit or a foundation? And how have these roles for the board members, how have they changed their expectations over their last 2 months? Like and perhaps Michelle, how are you leaning on your board differently now than you were maybe a couple of months ago?
And I'm so glad that is one of your questions, because I think it's such a critical issue in a time like this. And I'm not saying this because you're your father, but your father has brought an incredible amount of leadership and support. And I probably would be saying that same thing if we were in kind of a normal time prior to this happening. But I will tell you, as a board chair, as my executive committee, and I have a board of 26. So having their support and encouragement, along with also having very quick responses and votes, is critical. As when we again started the situation, and when the decision was made to shift all of our funding to support COVID-19 relief and recovery, we had to really scrap our entire grant cycle process, and the staff got together and rewrote one. And so in order for us to get the dollars where they needed to be, which is on the front lines to those nonprofits, we had to have that grant process approved very quickly. And it was a matter of scheduling a meeting with our executive committee, got their blessing really, really quickly, submitted that into a board vote, which we did online. And within less than, I would say, 24-hour period, not only had we had the executive committee support, but we had the final vote to where we could move forward. And we have just, as of yesterday, finished our 4th cycle of grants, giving out right now about $415,000 since April 1st. And that could not have happened without our board's prompt response. And so the staff, again, working very hard to sift through the requests and create recommendations. And then those are submitted to our executive committee right now. And I have to tell you, I'm going to give you yesterday as an example. I submitted it to them around 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon. By 4:30, I had full approval to move forward. So to be able to have a board that is responsive and is engaged and really supportive in a way that we've never really had to ask our board to be has been an incredible experience for me. And it's not only impacting me, it's impacting my team and our community. I also want to add that one of the things that I think is really special that our board chair did was, unbeknownst to me, sent a little care package to everyone on my team. So I got mine and I was like, oh, how nice he thought of me, but come to find out he thought of our entire team. And then it was a personalized note and some little great little gifts and a gift card. And it just was something that in a time of such stress, and my team is working double the amount of time they would on a normal basis, to have a board chair who would do that. I think that was really, really special. And so for me, I don't think we could have accomplished what we've accomplished since April 1st and what we will continue doing if it had not been for such strong board leadership and board support. And I'm just thankful that that's who we have.
That's awesome. Yeah. Barbara, my dad took a note from your book about the letter writing. I'm curious, Barbara, for you, if you have any, I know the boards that you've worked with have been probably a little bit more, not quite as nimble as the luck that Michelle has had, but I'm curious if you have any interesting board stories that would align.
Absolutely. And Michelle, love that, because you're both, the stories that you're sharing, you're able to move quick on decisions and you're just not forgetting the humanity, right? Like really appreciating what people are doing in these days. So yeah, I will share two. One is, of course, the interest closest, passionate to my heart is about environment and climate change, right? So what are we learning in these times that we can actually witness huge behavioral change pretty quickly. And it's amazing to see what nature can do without so many airplanes and going across the skies and cars on the roads. So one of the boards that I'm a part of, the real question has been sharing, again, these thought articles about noticing and witnessing what are we learning now during COVID that we want to take forward. And I really like that question, because so many folks, we want to just get through this phase and get back to normal, but I view it as an opportunity to think about how are we going to build a new normal. I don't think we can go back to business as usual, or we might, we'll see, but how can we be a little bit wiser? The second one, which is interesting, a board for a big educational institution, and colleges, universities, schools, they have all really been hit with this needing to pivot and being on the front lines. I've actually noticed that people have loved the efficient board meeting, where rather than 2 days flying off to Massachusetts, spending, night there before if you're coming from the West Coast, the time, the intensity, to actually run a board meeting that lasts 5 hours in total, does the entire business of the board, gets to decisions, but all done virtually, is pretty impressive. We can actually do that. And some people love it. And they kind of wonder, might we be able to do more of our official board duty, especially for some of these international or quite far reaching, when board members sit all over the country and frankly the world. Could we do this in a less intensive way using some of the digital technologies? So I think the things I'm noticing is, one, for boards that aren't faced with immediate crisis operations, like longer term, to be investigating questions that will take some reflection to really share that informally. And two, when it comes to the formal board meetings where professional decisions need to be made now, that efficiency that can be done when people put thought into their digital platforms has been an excellent realization. I think will change some boards immediately, from this point onwards.
I love that. Yeah, that's awesome. So we've got some awesome questions that are starting to come in. There's one or two other things before we get to those questions that I want to talk to you all, both about. And one of those things, and I'm sorry I did not send this to you guys in your pre-questions, but it sort of relates to everything is, you know, at Catalyst, we focus a lot on millennials, or as we like to say, those who are millennial minded. And why? That's really because, you know, as of this year, millennials make up 50% of the workforce. A study showed that 84% of millennial employees give to charity, and 70% of them donated more than an hour to charitable causes. This was something I read in Forbes. Of course, boomers and Gen Xers give more, but millennials, you know, become more generous over their lives and are likely to give if their parents give. That, you know, and I'm a millennial myself, we could become the most generous generation in history. So millennials are receiving thousands of messages every day about getting involved in multiple, you know, cause pursuits, but we're also super distracted, you know, constantly multitasking, frustrated by the status quo. And, you know, marketers are speaking to us, giving their messages to meet those conditions. Thus, you know, like the Tom's buy one, give one model was born. So there's been so much written about millennial and entitlement, apathy, indifference towards brands, but millennials are really the furthest thing from a passive audience. In fact, it's like our obsession with progress that the philanthropic community has been waiting for. So there's this possibility of a generation of people who believe that life could and should be better, and could be, you know, referred to instead of millennials, maybe the impact generation. And I'm just so curious, you know, for you all to see, you know, how you're messaging differently to millennials, or if you're seeing, you know, maybe it's through COVID-19 or just in general. Barbara, I know that, you know, the climate and things like that is a hot millennial topic and something that's very close to your heart. I'm curious if you guys are having to speak differently to millennials and what impacts you've seen from them.
Michelle, I'm happy if you want to lead, or happy to go ahead, which either.
One thing I'd love to share is a story about a local millennial here, and something he decided to do to come alongside of us. There's a gentleman here who just has a great passion, very creative, and we've done some work with him around different projects in the past, but he loves Gainesville, which is where we're located, and while we serve a larger region, it is our hub. And he created this entire program to support our COVID relief fund, and basically is promoting these t-shirts, and the t-shirts say "Good People of Gainesville," and it is a COVID relief fundraiser. So here's a millennial who in his spare time made the decision to create this this great kind of fundraising effort to promote our relief fund by creating these shirts, and people can wear them with great pride. And he's done local interviews and has his own website about it. And so I think that is a perfect example of a way that to engage a millennial group. And I'd love for us to take credit for it, but honestly, this is something that he worked on very closely with Megan Martin, who is my VP of marketing, and rolled this amazing opportunity out. And you know, it is raising thousands of dollars for our work, and from a multitude of people, but it's also raising an awareness to a generation that we need to know. And so I think that's been a very successful example of what you were talking about.
I love that.
Such a good example. I'm gonna get one of those t-shirts, Michelle. I also have to say that when it comes to the questions that COVID's tossing up, another thing that I've seen strongly led by millennial groups, predominantly led, is a real questioning of the current system. So one of the things, for example, people are so creative and can take innovation forward. I think that what we're going to see are some radical shifts from the understanding of the way things had to be. So one of the aspects of this is that with COVID and a lot of crisis, there will also be people who are able to come out of this in terms of market and success. You'll see technology just really racing ahead, you know, like Amazon, Netflix, the ways people are living and engaging. There are also going to be huge equity issues, which are starting to be teased up. And I think my experience of millennials is a real courage to have those difficult conversations and tee up the fact that although we're all in this together, the impact of it is not going to be equitable. It's not going to be fair. Some people are able to access the information, healthcare. Some people have digital services in their home to make best use for their families of online educations. So many others do not. And so I really hope that millennials continue to be brave and push the system around the aspects that over time really do need to change. I mean, that is the sole purpose of philanthropy and really the world of nonprofits. Philanthropy is supposed to be, as it's always been defined, as the risk capital for the nation. There's a reason why it's tax-free. It's that government doesn't spend those dollars. It doesn't tax those dollars. Instead, it's supposed to be risk capital. And if you think about that from a venture investment perspective, those dollars really need to be honed to nimble, smart, innovative, even high risk ways to go places where government, because of political inaction, cannot yet, or the democratic system isn't there yet. So can we actually address the bigger issues, like, for example, climate, where we haven't seen sufficient government action yet? How can we support the engines of growth? And that's the innovation and the creativity that I think millennials are so uniquely suited. You said it's distraction, but I actually think it's a whole new way of internalizing and synthesizing information from so many different sources that allows people to get really creative. So
I love
that's
that.
my excitement.
Yeah, that's amazing. So we've got a few questions that have come in, and I still have probably 5 more that I would love to ask you guys. But I want to respect the time of the people who are on the call. So I'm going to ask these questions to each of you just specifically, and we can just kind of keep our answers to a minute or less so that we can get to all of them. One from John says, with much needed resources going to COVID-19 response, have there been concerns or discussions that other longer term priorities such as climate change, resilience, CO2 reduction, or access to healthcare will be neglected / negatively impacted, especially as charitable giving has declined with reduced tax incentives? What is the outlook to maintain support in these other areas? Michelle, would you like to answer that one from John?
Sure, I'll be glad to. And again, this is from a community foundation perspective, so it might be a little bit of a different answer than Barbara would give. But, you know, we have funds that are set up in what we call our community impact funds, and those are funds that are set for specific purposes. And so some of those that we have are earmarked around things that could apply to, you know, access to healthcare or climate change or any of those type of situations. And that won't change because that's what they are for. With regard to the ones mentioned, access to healthcare is probably the most aligned with what we are working on. And that is not a piece that we've lost sight of at all. That is a piece that we have actually provided some funding to during this crisis and during our COVID relief. And it will be an area that we continue to focus on. We've got some great partners here that are on the ground doing, you know, more healthcare at discounted rates or free clinics or things like that, that we are coming around and supporting. And I don't foresee us changing that at all. And I would say that I would feel that probably those other areas are had that same impact for those organizations with the focus on them. People still have a passion about those. That hasn't changed the passion that people are feeling. It just, at this moment, I think the priority has been just to help the folks that are in crisis.
For sure. And Barbara, I'll ask you this next question because it's very closely related, is do you have any advice for nonprofits whose core mission is very far removed from anything COVID-19 related? We obviously want to keep championing our cause, but we don't want to appear tone deaf by encouraging donations away from something that's objectively the most pressing issue in the world right now.
Oh, I'm so glad that was a question that I had spied on the chat and was excited about. And also, the last anonymous attendee who entered this question, I'll answer a twofer if you don't mind, because I think this is related, where this person is asking self-reflection and also how do you manage your own emotions during these moments of uncertainty? I think that is so beautiful because it relates a lot to how we stand in this time. So in terms of managing emotions, I have to say I've been reaching for a lot of poetry. I mean, for me, having time for meditation and mindfulness is very important. But if you haven't tucked into anything by Mary Oliver lately, I recommend, she's got some gorgeous poems in her book, Devotions. And one of them, which struck me this morning, which I wanted to share because it relates to how we can start to see from the immediate crisis into the deeper pieces. And she writes, I believe in kindness, also in mischief, also in singing, especially when singing is not necessarily prescribed. So why I read that poem and why it helps sustain me is that question about being afraid of being tone deaf in this moment. I really want to encourage people to sing their songs. So early in the crisis, we talked about climate as something that we could start to really watch that note as this moved forward. Our current federal administration hasn't talked too much about it, but how are we going to think about that over time? I think this absolutely is the time to have more one-on-one, but like deeper conversations about systemic issues that this moment is allowing us to have. We just cannot keep soldiering on. And believe me, I say this with all due respect, there's a plenty of importance to reacting to what is happening in this moment. But I also think that if we can do anything with this time, it is also about looking into the causes that we continue to promote and just having honest conversations about how have we contributed to the current system, what are aspects that might need to be revisited. And in part, I really believe that refining our cases for support, this is the time. Re-envisioning the kinds of events we do, who we reach out to, who is included, this is the time. So the question about singing our song and doing that in part to not abandon what we care about is really important, really important.
I love that. Well, we've just got a couple of minutes left. I see that there's 3 other questions. If you didn't get your question answered, feel free to email it to coffee@catalystcreative.com, and we'll make sure that Barbara and Michelle get those questions and we can help answer those as well. But I just wanted to thank Barbara and Michelle so much. And just in our last minute, do either of you have sort of any sort of closing thoughts or anything that you'd like to leave our callers with?
Well, I will just share that I think that, Robert, you hosting things like this and gathering community together and doing it with such a gorgeous sense of etiquette, kindness, graciousness is such a path forward. So huge thanks to you and the entire Catalyst team who always motivates me with how you guys conduct yourself uniquely and beautifully.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
And I would add to what Barbara said. I think I've learned in my own journey that these kind of conversations that you're having and this moment for folks to take a break and to learn and hear about what's happening is a great way to help everyone that is struggling kind of in this new world we're living in right now. And so I appreciate that as well. I also want to just say that in all of this fear and time of great concern and stress, the humankind spirit that is out there, the generosity, the support that we have seen over the last 6 to 8 weeks and will continue, I'm sure, seeing as we go through this, has just been unbelievable. And so in those moments where you're struggling with all the negativity that's out there that we're seeing, just remember that there are, so many folks who are doing so much great work and helping in the way that they're able to, whether that's giving money or volunteering or supporting or whatever that may be, but they are truly making an impact and making a difference. And ultimately that will bring the positivity back that we're missing right now.
Absolutely. Both amazing tidbits from both of you. And again, I really appreciate it. A few other things that I just want to add is, during this time, as always, we know that there's a lot of people of need and a lot of people are hurting. So if you can, consider giving to organizations who you feel need those donations most. If you can't give financially, please consider giving a bit of your time. Thank you all so much for joining us today and every week. It's hard to believe, like I said, that this was our 8th installment, but the feedback that each of you provide about topics you want to learn about more, potential panelists, and the suggestions that you've offered us regarding the calls is so appreciated and welcome. So please stay in touch with me or coffee@catalystcreative.com so that we can continue to meet the needs of our community. And remember that, most importantly in this ever-changing world that we live in, to give yourself a little grace, take some time to practice gratitude in your own life. It's so easy to get caught up in the news and all the COVID talk. So take a walk, reach out to family and friends, take Barbara's advice and write a letter to those who may be alone, and just continue to join us each week. It's going to be every Wednesday at 12 noon. So as we say, those on the East Coast, your week is now half over. So enjoy the rest of your week, and we look forward to having you back with us in the future.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.